They thought he was dangerous. They thought he was broken. But none of them were there the night Ranger dragged a screaming child from a burning house while his own fur caught fire. By the time the truth was buried, he was discarded, sold for $1, and locked in a cage like trash. And yet, when a little girl he had never met walked toward him with crumpled bills and a trembling voice, Ranger didn't growl. He didn't back away. He raised his paw. It was the same gesture he used to signal to his trainers that a child was still alive under the rubble. Only this time, no officer believed him. Only this time, the only person who heard his silent plea was a 7-year-old girl. And what happened next would expose a truth the town had tried to bury. The barn sat on the edge of Hollow Creek like a tired skeleton, its beams groaning with every gust that slipped through the broken slats. Dawn light leaked through the warped boards, catching the dust hanging in the air. People shuffled inside with boots heavy from mud, voices rough from early morning coffee and colder mornings. They came to buy what was left behind. Horses too slow, goats too sick, dogs too broken to matter. In the farthest corner, half swallowed by shadow, a steel cage rattled each time the wind pushed at it. Inside lay a German shepherd with a thick neck, a scar carving through the fur along his flank, and eyes that had once burned bright. Now they looked dull, washed out like a storm cloud that had lost its thunder. His name was Ranger. Once he belonged to Redwood County's K-9 unit. Once he could track a suspect through the woods in the rain, find missing kids in the dead of night, stand stone still beside his handler as adrenaline tore through a crime scene. But those days lived only in memories he couldn't shake and nightmares he couldn't stop. He shifted his weight, wincing as the bullet grazed scar along his hip stung. It was the wound that ended everything. One raid gone wrong. 1 second of heroism that cost him his career, his home, and the only human he had ever trusted. He had taken the hit meant for his partner. Then the report said he was unstable, unpredictable, no longer fit for service. Files were altered, details softened, blame scattered, and then quietly buried. The truth lay somewhere deeper, hidden under signatures, and the silence of men afraid to admit what they had done. The cage rattled again as someone tapped the bars with a boot. A man in a denim jacket squinted inside. "This one's done for. Look at him. Wouldn't take him for free." Another man laughed. "For $1, maybe he becomes fertilizer." The barn erupted in low laughter. Ranger didn't lift his head. His body stayed still except for the faint tremble running through his shoulders. No one knew he had saved a child the night before his discharge. A gas line explosion, smoke curling through a neighborhood, a toddler crying behind a fallen beam. Ranger had dragged the child out, burning, his paws and tearing the scar on his hip open. But that report never saw daylight. It didn't fit the story someone wanted told. A woman wrapped in a plaid coat passed by and muttered, "Poor thing," before walking on quickly, as if pity was something the dog might bite. Ranger's breath came slow and thin. His heartbeat pulsed against the cold dirt floor. He didn't look at the crowd anymore. He had learned that eyes always led to disappointment. The auctioneer climbed onto the small plywood platform and tapped the microphone. "Morning, folks. Let's get started. Next up, we got an abandoned police dog. Starting at $1. He said it like a joke, like the idea of any creature being sold at that price was amusing enough to brighten the morning. More laughter rolled through the barn. Someone clapped mockingly. Ranger kept still, but his ears twitched. He remembered the sound of that word police, the way a wounded veteran remembers the echo of an explosion. The memories came in flashes. His handler's voice, the snap of a leash, the rhythm of boots, the warmth of praise, then fire, metal, pain, silence. Now he sat behind rusted bars, waiting to be traded like scrap. The auctioneer leaned closer to the crowd, eager to move things along. $1. Anybody. He's strong at least, or he used to be. No one stepped forward. Then a small sound broke the tension. A soft sniff. A tiny gasp. A little girl had slipped into the barn entrance with her mother, her purple jacket too big, her hair pulled into uneven pigtails. She paused as if the air inside felt heavier than the cold outside. Her mother guided her forward, trying to avoid the mud on the floor. The girl's gaze drifted over the animals, then suddenly stopped. Locked. Her breath hitched. She had seen him. A flicker of something old and buried lit in Ranger's eyes. His ears lifted an inch, his head turned toward her, slow and unsure, as if drawn by an instinct that had survived everything else. The girl stepped closer, ignoring her mother's warning hand on her shoulder. In that barn full of noise, something strange happened. Ranger stopped trembling. Just for a second, the shaking eased, the fear quieted, his heartbeat steadied. One more step and she stood directly in front of his cage. The sunlight caught her face, innocent, curious, unafraid. The crowd went quiet, uneasy at the sight of a child standing so near the broken dog. Someone whispered, "She shouldn't be doing that." But the girl didn't move away. Her voice came out barely louder than the dust shifting in the air. "It's okay," she whispered. "I see you." Ranger blinked slowly, the way a tired soldier might after recognizing a voice he thought he'd never hear again. The auctioneer cleared his throat louder this time. $1. Last call. No one raised a hand, but Ranger's eyes didn't leave the girl. For the first time in months, he felt the faint pull of purpose. A thread tying him to something that wasn't pain or fear. The girl lifted the hand that had been hidden inside her jacket pocket. In her palm was a crumpled bill. $1. She whispered again, this time with a trembling certainty. "I'll buy him." The barn froze, every laugh dying mid-breath. The auctioneer stared. Her mother gasped. A few men muttered, "Is she crazy? Or is this a joke?" But it wasn't a joke. Ranger knew it too. He stood. Slowly, painfully. His legs shook, but he rose anyway, lifting himself toward the bars. Toward her. Plot twist hit the room like a spark. Ranger extended his paw through the bars and touched her hand before anyone could stop him. The crowd fell into stunned silence. Because in that moment, it wasn't a girl buying a broken dog. It was a forgotten hero recognizing the one person in the room who didn't see him as trash. It was the first moment of truth in a barn full of lies. Mia Whitaker had been to plenty of barns before. Her mother worked long shifts at the Hollow Creek Sheriff's Office, and whenever they fostered rescued animals, Mia tagged along, tiny hands eager to help, tiny heart always open. But today felt different from the moment she stepped into the dusty auction barn at her mother's side. The air felt tight, heavy, like a place holding its breath. Deputy Claire Whitaker kept a protective palm on her daughter's shoulder as they moved through the narrow crowd. She scanned the room with the sharp eye of someone trained for trouble. Her badge rested inside her coat, but danger had a way of recognizing a cop, even when it couldn't see one. "Stay close, sweetheart. People here don't always keep their animals safe." Mia nodded, though her attention drifted past the stalls of goats and chickens. Her gaze pulled toward the dim corner where she had first seen him. That dog! The one no one else wanted. The one whose eyes looked like they carried too much night. Ranger, Claire was busy speaking with a rescue volunteer, discussing which animals could be transferred to the non-profit the following week. Mia barely heard them. Something deeper tugged at her, something she couldn't explain. She moved closer to Ranger's cage, drawn by a force almost magnetic. She stopped a foot away from the bars. Ranger lifted his head. The movement was small, but it hit Mia like a wave. His eyes, golden and tired, landed on her with a focus that felt almost human. She swallowed, suddenly aware of how loud her heart sounded in her own chest. Claire turned just in time to see her daughter reaching the cage. "Mia, step back, right now." Her voice cut through the barn like a crack of lightning. A few people looked over. One man smirked. Another chuckled, like watching a cop panic was entertainment. Claire rushed forward, hand closing around Mia's arm. "I told you not to get close. That dog is dangerous." But the warning didn't match what Mia felt. She glanced up at her mother, her voice soft. "He's not dangerous. He's scared." Ranger didn't move, but something about the way he held her stare made Claire uneasy. The dog looked alert, tense, every muscle coiled, but not in the way she had seen with truly aggressive animals. No, this looked like discipline, training, memory. Claire knew that look too well. It was the look of a dog reading a situation like an officer would. Still, she kept her daughter behind her. The last thing she wanted was a tragedy in a place where tragedies were sold for $1. The volunteer at the next stall stepped over, arms crossed. "That shepherd. Bad news. He was in 3 shelters before this. Doesn't let anyone near him. Some dogs break and don't come back." Mia peeked around her mother's coat. "But he came back when I called him." Claire stiffened, confused. "You called him?" She hadn't heard her daughter say a word, but Ranger had reacted. She saw it earlier, and she couldn't deny it now. The dog's ears had perked, nose lifted, eyes clicking instantly to Mia as though drawn by command. Ranger shifted again, leaning slightly closer to the bars. His tail didn't wag, but his posture changed. It was subtle, but trained dogs never forgot how to communicate with their bodies. His weight shifted forward, his head lowered, his eyes softened. It was the smallest signal, but to anyone who knew canine behavior, it was impossible to mistake. He was acknowledging her, not as a stranger, as something else. The volunteer frowned, unnerved. "That's unusual. He hasn't approached anyone in weeks. Nearly bit a guy last week." Mia whispered, more to Ranger than anyone else. "You remember me?" Claire felt a chill crawl up her spine. Something was happening that didn't fit the rules. Ranger wasn't supposed to trust. Not after what he'd been through. Dogs used for service often carried trauma like scar tissue. They didn't lean toward strangers. They didn't break silence for no reason. Ranger's nostrils flared, taking in Mia's scent. His pupils narrowed, then widened again. And then something else surfaced behind his gaze. Recognition? Relief? Claire couldn't tell, but she could see the change. Ranger lowered himself to his elbows, front legs stretched out, head dipped between them. Submission, not fear. A gesture officers used to see during training sessions when a dog targeted one specific person in a room. The volunteer's face drained of color. That is not normal. Claire's pulse quickened. Ranger's file had flagged him as unstable after a failed raid, but this didn't look unstable. It looked intentional, controlled. A dog remembering a duty it hadn't been allowed to fulfill since being discharged. Mia stepped closer before Claire could stop her. She kneeled, pressing her hand gently against the bars. "It's okay, Ranger. I'm right here." Ranger's eyes sharpened. The tremble running through his body eased. He pushed his nose forward until it brushed against her fingers. Claire froze. Ranger hadn't allowed anyone to touch him in months, according to the shelter's reports. Not handlers, not vets. No one. Then, as if pulled by instinct older than memory, Ranger shifted his body, sliding closer to the front of the cage. His chest pressed against the bars. He inhaled deeply, recognizing something about the small girl kneeling before him. And then it happened. The barn door slammed open so hard it shook dust from the rafters. A man stumbled in, shouting for the auctioneer, holding a gas-stained jacket. "Fire broke out at the miller's house," he yelled. "The kid's safe, thanks to a miracle. Found outside somehow." The crowd erupted into noise, questions flying. Claire's face paled. She knew the Millers. Their house was miles away. The volunteer muttered, confused. "That's strange. The report said the kid was dragged out before firefighters arrived. No footprints except the kid's. No adult tracks at all." Claire stared at Ranger. Ranger stared back, and Mia, unable to understand the weight of what she had just heard, smiled and whispered again, "I knew you were trying to help." A flicker shot through Ranger's eyes. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. The child he had saved wasn't the one mentioned in the report, but the voice he had heard that night, faint through smoke and chaos, the one he had crawled toward despite the pain, the one that had echoed in his memory since that night, was the same voice kneeling in front of him now. Mia's. And in that instant, something ancient and unbroken surged up inside him. The instinct to protect. The instinct they had tried to bury. The instinct that had never died. The auctioneer slapped his palm against the microphone, clearing his throat loud enough to hush the rising chatter. "Lot number 47. Former police K9. Starting bid, $1. His voice bounced across the barn, but it didn't carry pride or respect. It carried boredom, the kind reserved for things already written off. No one stepped closer. No hands lifted. A few men shifted their weight, pretending they hadn't heard at all. Ranger stayed low in the cage, his body tight as a coiled spring. He had learned this part. This was when eyes passed through him like he wasn't there, when harsh whispers landed like kicks he could not dodge. The auctioneer sighed dramatically. "Folks, even $1 a steal for a dog his size. Somebody take him." Nothing. A chuckle rolled from somewhere in the back. A woman muttered something about liability. Another man snorted, shaking his head like the very idea was foolish. Ranger's breathing grew shallower. The tremor in his limbs returned. His scar throbbed as if remembering the night everything fell apart. The auctioneer lifted the gavel, ready to move on. Then a small, steady voice cut through the stale air. "I'll buy him." Silence slammed over the room like a door shutting. Heads turned, boots scraped against the dirt floor. Even the horses in the distant stalls paused, ears flicking at the sudden stillness. Mia stepped forward, her purple jacket brushing against her mother's leg. In her hand was a crumpled $1 bill she had smoothed carefully between her palms. The paper trembled, but her voice didn't. "I want that dog." Claire's breath caught. "Mia." The auctioneer blinked at her, as though unsure she was real. You're bidding?" "On him." Mia nodded, lifting the dollar higher. A wave of reactions washed through the barn. A few people laughed outright. "Let the kid have a toy." Someone snickered. "Watch it bite her before she reaches the door." Claire stepped forward, jaw tight. Enough. But Mia didn't hear them. Her eyes stayed locked on Ranger's. And Ranger, for the first time in months, lifted himself to his feet. Slowly, painfully, but with purpose. His nails scraped the floor of the cage as he inched toward the bars. Claire froze. She knew the posture, the angle of the head, the way his tail hung neither stiff nor loose. This wasn't aggression. This wasn't fear. This was a dog deciding. Mia knelt, placing her small hand near the cage door. It hovered there, close, but not quite touching the metal. Ranger lowered his head until his nose brushed the air near her fingers. Then he did something that made the entire barn lean in. He lifted his scarred paw and pressed it through the bars, placing it gently into her palm. The barn erupted with whispers. People glanced at each other, confused, startled, unsure if they had just witnessed something dangerous or something sacred. The volunteer who had warned Claire earlier actually stepped back. "I've never seen him do that." The auctioneer swallowed. "Well, that's a bid. $1 going once." Mia squeezed Ranger's paw, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay, boy. I'm right here." Claire's chest tightened. She had seen countless canines during her years on the force. Trained ones, dangerous ones, broken ones. But this look, this slow blink of Ranger's, this shift of his weight toward Mia, he wasn't reaching out to dominate. He was reaching out to surrender, to ask, to trust. Ranger's eyes flicked up at Claire, then returned to Mia, as if he understood exactly who held the decision in this moment. Claire exhaled slowly. His posture wasn't random. It was a request only handlers knew how to read. A silent plea that said, "I won't hurt her. Let me be hers." The crowd muttered again, but something had changed. The laughter lacked its earlier sharp edge. A few expressions softened. A couple of older men exchanged looks of recognition, as though understanding a language they had forgotten they knew. The auctioneer raised his brows, making sure no one else would intervene. $1 going twice. Someone at the back muttered sarcastically, "Let her waste her money. It's a dog, not a miracle." Claire's eyes snapped toward the voice, but she didn't respond. Ranger did. A low growl rolled through his chest, not loud, but deep enough to silence the muttering man. The crowd stiffened. Then Claire realized the growl wasn't directed at the man at all. It was a warning she recognized from canine training yards, a signal that a dog was no longer afraid for himself. He was afraid for the one beside him. A plot twist so subtle yet so powerful rippled beneath the surface. Ranger wasn't just accepting Mia, he was choosing her, claiming her, like he had been waiting for her before he even knew her name. The auctioneer dropped the gavel with a dull thud. "Sold to the little lady for $1. The word sold echoed deeper than he intended, because everyone watching knew something rare had just happened. In a barn full of people too blind or too bitter to care, a forgotten police dog had reached through rusted bars to touch the only person who saw him as more than his scars. And for Ranger, that touch wasn't just a moment. It was the first clue that his life was no longer ending. It was just beginning. The Whitaker house sat at the end of a gravel road just outside Hollow Creek, where the fields ran long and the nights stayed quiet. When Claire opened the back door that evening, Ranger hesitated at the threshold, his body angled sideways as if expecting another cage to slam shut. "It's okay, boy," Claire said softly. But it wasn't her voice that moved him. It was Mia's small hand patting her leg, her smile warm and certain. "Come on, Ranger, this is home." He stepped inside. Not confidently, not gracefully, but he crossed the line. Inside he paced the hallway, sniffing corners, flinching at sudden sounds. His tail stayed tucked, his ears low. Every muscle braced for the unknown. Yet every time he circled back toward Mia, his breathing eased, his posture softened. By bedtime, he lay curled near her feet while she drew pictures of him with bright crayons. The soldier inside him never stopped scanning the room, but something in his chest loosened, stretching like a wound beginning to knit. Claire watched from the doorway, arms folded, expression conflicted. Her protective instincts battled with what she was seeing. Ranger wasn't acting like a dangerous dog. He was acting like one starved for belonging. Still, she couldn't shake a question that had been grinding in her mind since the barn. How does a decorated canine end up dumped for $1? She waited until Mia fell asleep, then stepped quietly into the kitchen. Ranger lifted his head, ears pivoting towards her. He watched her move the way trained dogs watched handlers during night shifts. Alert, aware, it made her throat tighten. He shouldn't have been here like this. Claire pulled open her laptop and typed his old call sign into the sheriff system, K903 Ranger. Nothing appeared. She frowned. She had seen hundreds of K9 records. Even dogs retired early left trails of reports, vet forms, commendations. But Ranger's record was bare. as if someone had wiped the slate clean. She tried again, digging through archived files. Still nothing. Then she found one breadcrumb. An older line, item buried in a system migration folder. A single reference to an officer on duty during Ranger's final raid. Sergeant Andrew Dillon. The name hit her like a cold wind. She remembered him. Suspended twice. Reputation for cutting corners. Always one step away from internal affairs. And if he'd been anywhere near a K9 unit that night, trouble wasn't surprising. Claire exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. She needed answers. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed a number she swore she wouldn't use again. The line rang twice. A raspy voice answered. "Whitaker. Haven't heard that name in years." Ranger froze. His head shot up, eyes locked on the phone, body rigid. Claire kept her tone even. "Dillon, I'm calling about a dog. K9R03. Ranger." Silence cracked through the line. Dillon's breath hitched. That mutt thought he was put down. Ranger growled. Not a warning growl, not fear, recognition. He moved closer, nose lifted, scenting the air like the voice itself carried an odor. His hackles rose, not wildly, but with chilling precision. Claire had seen that posture during raids. That was how a dog reacted when it identified a threat. Mia's voice echoed faintly from her room upstairs. Ranger flicked an ear toward the sound, then back to the phone, torn between staying alert and guarding. Claire swallowed. Why was his file erased? Dillon scoffed. Doesn't matter now. That operation was a mess. Dog wasn't the only thing that got hurt. Then his tone sharpened. Drop it, Whitaker. The less you dig, the safer you stay. Ranger barked. A single, sharp, slicing sound that made the curtains shake. Claire nearly dropped the phone. Ranger lunged forward, teeth bared, not at her, but at the air around the device. His paws dug into the floor like he was bracing for impact, muscles locked in battle memory. Dillon cursed as the bark echoed through the receiver. Jesus, he's still alive? That animal should have never... Claire cut him off. What happened that night? Another long pause. Then Dillon's voice turned low and cold. Ask someone else. I'm done taking the fall for that mess. The call ended. The room fell silent. But Ranger didn't calm. He stalked forward, circling Claire, sniffing the air as if expecting Dillon to materialize from the shadows. His breaths came sharp. His body stayed coiled, ready. Claire crouched to his level. Ranger, look at me. He turned his head sharply, locking eyes with her. For a second she saw past the fear and into something older, something wounded, something remembering. Then, like a film reel snapping to life, a flash of his past hit him. Gunfire, smoke, the faint cry of a child. Dillon yelling orders that contradicted training. The cold sting of metal as a bullet grazed his hip. The gas explosion that swallowed the street. The smell of betrayal in the air. Ranger let out a noise that wasn't a growl or a whine. Something in between. Something that came from a place that never healed. Claire reached for his collar but stopped when he flinched. Slowly she withdrew her hand. She didn't want to trigger whatever memory he was fighting. Instead she whispered, calm and steady. You're safe here. No one is hurting you again. Ranger held her gaze another moment before stepping back. His breathing slowed. His shoulders dropped. But his eyes stayed sharp, scanning the windows, the door, the hallway to Mia's room. Claire understood. He wasn't afraid Dillon might return. He was preparing for it. When she finally stood and shut down her laptop, one truth burned clear in her chest. Someone had buried the truth about that raid. Someone wanted Ranger forgotten. But he hadn't forgotten anything, and whatever he remembered was dangerous enough to make a broken dog shake at the sound of a man's voice. Claire glanced upstairs, listening to Mia's steady breathing. If Dylan was involved in what happened to Ranger, he wasn't done with them yet. As Claire turned off the kitchen light, Ranger moved to the base of the stairs, lying across the bottom step like a living barrier. Guarding, waiting, protecting. The instinct had awakened, and it was only the beginning. The storm rolled in just after midnight, thick clouds swallowing the moon and smothering Hollow Creek in a darkness heavier than the hour deserved. Wind scraped the branches against the windows, but inside the Whitaker house, everything was still. Ranger slept at the base of the stairs, though sleep for him was never deep. His ears twitched at each shift in the night, his breathing slow but alert. Mia slept upstairs, curled beneath her blanket, one arm wrapped around her stuffed bear. Claire sat on the couch with a mug of cold coffee, files scattered beside her, trying to piece together what the department had tried to hide. A creak snapped through the hallway. Ranger's eyes opened. Not gradually, not lazily, instantly. His head shot up, ears pinned forward. He inhaled once, sharp and fast. Claire looked up from her notes. Ranger. He didn't move toward her voice. He turned toward the back of the house, body stiffening, every instinct narrowing in one direction. Then came the sound Claire hadn't heard in years. The soft, unmistakable click of a window being pried open. The mug slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Ranger was already gone. His paws hammered up the stairs before she could shout. His tail stiff, his breathing silent, his focus absolute. Claire's pulse slammed in her ears as she grabbed her service flashlight from the counter and sprinted after him. By the time she reached the landing, Ranger was planted in front of Mia's bedroom door, his body angled sideways, head lowered, shoulders tight. "Ready," Claire whispered. "Ranger, what is it?" Then she heard it. The slow tread of boots on hardwood. Heavy, careful, measured. Not a thief, a professional. Claire pulled Mia's door open and pushed her daughter inside, whispering to stay low, stay quiet. Mia clutched her mother's sleeve, frightened, but Ranger stepped between them, pressing his flank against Mia's legs as if to anchor her. A shadow crossed the hallway. Claire snapped off the hall light and pressed against the wall, heart pounding. The figure moved closer, carrying a scent she recognized before her brain caught up. Gun oil, metal, sweat, the exact combination she had smelled on Dylan's uniform years ago after the failed raid. Her stomach turned. Ranger knew it too. He growled, a sound Claire felt more than heard. It vibrated through the floorboards, deep and controlled. Not wild anger, not fear, combat readiness. The man stepped into the hallway fully, face obscured under a hood, gloves on his hands, a silencer attached to the weapon at his side. His shoes left faint tracks of mud. Claire's eyes dropped to the prints. The tread pattern matched the photo in Ranger's file. The same prints found at the raid site. The same prints the department claimed belonged to a suspect who got away. Except he hadn't. He was standing in Claire's hallway. Plot twist hit Claire fast and hard. Dylan hadn't been covering for a random criminal that night. He had been covering for one of his own. Ranger lunged before the man could raise the gun. He hit with silent force, jaws locking onto the attacker's forearm, teeth driving through the fabric, through the skin. The man stumbled back, smashing into the wall, cursing under his breath. Claire grabbed Mia, pulling her behind her body, but Ranger didn't retreat. The old K9 had become a shield again. The intruder fought back hard, slamming his fist into Ranger's side, aiming to break his grip, but Ranger held. His hind legs braced, claws digging into the floor, his entire body burning with memories of every raid, every fight, every command he had ever obeyed. Claire seized the moment, shining her flashlight directly into the intruder's eyes. He flinched, throwing an arm up. Ranger shifted his bite, sinking deeper. The man screamed and rammed a knee upward, catching Ranger's old hip wound. Ranger yelped, legs buckling for a heartbeat. Then he surged forward again, driving the man into the banister hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. Claire reached for the weapon, but the intruder swung first, hitting her across the shoulder. She stumbled but didn't fall. Mia cried out, but Ranger barked, a sharp command, urging her back inside the room. Claire regained her balance, grabbed the closest object she could reach, and smashed a heavy picture frame into the intruder's wrist. The gun clattered to the floor. Ranger released the arm and went for the leg, tearing the attacker off balance. The man fell, hard. Claire kicked the gun down the hallway, sending it skidding under a cabinet. The man groaned, trying to crawl away, but Ranger planted a paw on his chest, teeth bared inches from his throat. Claire snapped her cuffs from her belt and locked one around the intruder's wrist before he could fight again. He spat blood and glared at her. "You shouldn't have dug this up, Whitaker." His voice, low, familiar. Dylan's partner. The one who disappeared after the raid. The one Internal Affairs could never locate. The one Dylan refused to talk about. Ranger snarled again, the sound dripping with recognition and rage. The man smirked weakly, blood pooling beneath him. That dog should have stayed buried. Claire's voice was steady, ice cold. "You made a mistake coming back here." "No," he said with a bitter laugh. "I came to erase one." He jerked his chin toward Ranger. "He remembers too much." A wave of realization hit Claire like a punch. This wasn't a robbery. This was a cover-up resurfacing. Ranger stepped harder onto the intruder's chest, his breathing heavy, but his eyes unblinking. Not fear, purpose. Claire secured the second cuff, grabbed the man's hood, and yanked it back to expose his face. A face that matched the blurred photo in Ranger's old case file. Same jawline, same scar, same eyes that had watched Ranger fall that night. Ranger leaned closer, nose flaring, checking for the scent burned into his memory. It matched, perfectly. Claire's flashlight beam trembled as she looked down at the man who had nearly cost Ranger his life years ago. Mia whispered from behind her, her voice trembling. "Mum, who is he?" Claire tightened the cuffs, her jaw set. "He's the reason Ranger was thrown away." Ranger stood over him, chest rising and falling, claiming victory not with brutality, but with the steadiness of a soldier reclaiming truth. And in that dark hallway, lit only by Claire's shaky beam of light, one thing became painfully, overwhelmingly clear. The raid had never failed because of Ranger. It had failed because someone had betrayed him, and now the man who tried to silence that truth was lying on Claire Whitaker's floor with a canine hero standing guard over him once more. The following night dropped over Hollow Creek like a shroud. The air was strangely still, the kind of quiet that made Claire keep checking the locks twice, the windows 3 times. She had reported the intruder, but she knew how it worked in small towns. Paperwork moved slow. Secrets moved faster. And people who wanted to stay hidden didn't wait. Ranger didn't sleep. He lay at the base of the stairs again, eyes half open, head lifting at every sound outside. His body was tense but patient, like he was listening to something Claire couldn't hear. Something in the wind. Something in memory. Around 2 a.m, his ears snapped upright. He stood silently, tail stiff, scanning the dark hallway. Claire felt the shift before she heard the noise. She walked out of her bedroom, and Ranger met her at the landing, blocking her path with his body. He let out a single low breath that vibrated through the floor. Then came the sound. Metal scraping against the back fence. Claire's heart dropped. "They're back." Ranger didn't wait for her command. He moved down the stairs like a shadow, each step deliberate. Claire followed, grabbing the baseball bat propped behind the door. She checked to make sure Mia was still asleep. But Ranger stopped at the entryway, freezing her in place. Two voices whispered outside the window. "I told you, the memory card's here. Dylan said the woman might have grabbed it from the old files she accessed." "She doesn't know what she has." The second voice muttered. "We grab it, we go." No noise. The memory card. The missing evidence. The piece that proved Ranger saved a child and someone had rewritten the report to bury him. Claire's stomach twisted. She had never seen such a card in the file, meaning someone else had taken it. Someone who didn't want it destroyed. Outside, the motion sensor light flicked on. Footsteps crunched across the gravel. Ranger moved first. He exploded through the back door's dog flap so fast the rubber panel didn't even sway. A streak of muscle, fur, and force shot across the yard. The intruders screamed. Claire burst through the door, bat ready. She saw Ranger collide with the first intruder, knocking the wind out of him before he could reach for his weapon. Ranger didn't bite for flesh. He grabbed the man's coat sleeve, dragging him down with precision learned from years of controlled takedowns. The second man jumped back, swearing, pulling a stun baton from his belt. He swung. Ranger ducked and lunged again, hitting the man square in the leg. The baton fell into the grass. Claire rushed in, seized the handle, and jabbed it into the man's thigh. Electricity snapped through the air, and he collapsed with a grunt. Inside the house, Mia woke to the noise. Instead of running into danger, she did exactly what Claire had drilled into her. She grabbed the phone beside her bed and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "My mum's outside," she whispered. "The bad guys are back. Please hurry." Outside, Ranger kept the first intruder pinned. The man struggled, panting. "Get this monster off me." Ranger shifted his stance. Not killing. Not even hurting badly. Just holding. Perfectly. Like he had never left the force. The second intruder crawled backward, clutching his leg. Claire stepped toward him, bat raised, but then he shouted, "Stop! Wait! Claire, it's me!" The bat froze mid-air. Claire's eyes widened as the intruder pushed the hood off his head. She recognized him instantly. Officer Mark Hensley, a former colleague. Someone who once patrolled nights with her, who had quit suddenly after the raid involving Ranger. Someone who had never given her a straight answer about why. Claire lowered the bat, stunned. "Mark, what the hell are you doing here?" His face twisted with guilt. I tried to stop him. He gestured toward the other man pinned by Ranger. I tried to stop Dylan too, but I was a coward. I kept quiet. Mark swallowed hard. "I'm not running anymore." Ranger growled low, shifting to block Mark's path. Mark raised his hands slowly. "Easy, boy. I'm not here to hurt her." Claire didn't know whether to trust him, but something in his voice, tired, cracked, desperate, made her hesitate. Mark reached into his pocket with trembling fingers. Ranger tensed immediately, pushing forward, ready to strike. Claire stepped closer, whispering, "Ranger, hold!" Ranger froze, the command slicing through him like training resurfacing from deep in his bones. Mark slowly pulled out a small metal case. He held it out at arm's length. "This isn't a weapon, Claire. It's the memory card. The real one." Claire's breath caught. "The one the department lost? The one they destroyed?" he said quietly. "Or thought they did. Dylan kept a copy to protect himself. But when they tried to bury Ranger, I couldn't throw this away." He opened the case. Inside was a tiny SD card, its label faded but intact. Claire's eyes burned. "Why now?" "Because he's coming for all of us," Mark said, nodding at the man pinned under Ranger. "They're cleaning up loose ends. You, Ranger, me." That night wasn't a failure. It was a cover-up, and Ranger wasn't supposed to survive. Ranger pressed harder on the pinned intruder's chest until he winced in pain. Claire took the card, her hands shaking. "What's on it?" "Everything," Mark said. "The real footage of the raid. The proof Ranger saved that child. the proof someone else fired the wrong shot and blamed him. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Mark stepped back, surrendering himself. "I'll testify. I'll do everything I should have done years ago. Just protect your daughter. Dylan won't stop." Ranger turned his head toward the street, listening to the approaching vehicles. His stance didn't ease. He stayed between Mia's window and danger, shoulders squared, eyes burning with purpose. When the deputies arrived, they found Claire standing with the memory card clenched in her fist. Ranger stood over the subdued attacker like a soldier reclaiming his honor. And Mark Hensley stood with his hands raised, finally choosing the right side of the truth. In that moment, with blue lights flashing across the yard, Claire understood something she wished she had known sooner. Ranger hadn't just been abandoned, he had been silenced. But now the story was shifting. The evidence was found. A witness had turned, and the canine they tried to bury had risen back into the fight. Claire looked at Ranger as deputies secured the scene. "You really are a hero," she whispered. Ranger didn't move, didn't blink. He just kept watching the darkness beyond the yard, waiting for the next threat. Ready. The Redwood County Sheriff's Office had seen chaos before, but nothing like the storm that arrived the morning Claire walked in with the memory card. Word spread fast through the station. Doors cracked open. Officers whispered. Some stared at Ranger as if seeing a ghost walk beside her. Claire signed the evidence intake form with a steady hand, though her pulse hammered beneath her skin. Ranger stood at her side, posture alert but calm, his gaze sweeping the room like he was taking inventory of every exit, every sound, every heartbeat. Detective Harris plugged the card into the system. The footage loaded in seconds. The room fell silent. There it was. The raid. The smoke-filled hallway. Ranger forcing his way toward a child's cry. Dylan shouting to hold position. A muzzle flash from the wrong direction. Ranger diving into the line of fire. The explosion that tore through the building. And then, the damning part. Dylan rewriting the report with cold precision while Ranger lay bleeding. Harris leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. This is enough to indict him 10 times over. Claire didn't blink. Do it. By noon, Internal Affairs swept in. By evening, Sergeant Dylan was in cuffs, shouting about conspiracies and lies as he was dragged down the hallway. Officers who had once worked under him refused to even look him in the eye. The betrayal cut deep, like realizing a trusted captain had sunk the whole ship just to save himself. Dylan locked eyes with Ranger as he passed. The dog didn't growl, he didn't bark. He simply stood tall, ears forward, watching the man who tried to erase him. Dylan looked away first. The hearing came 3 days later. The Redwood County Assembly Hall filled with officers, reporters, and townspeople. Some came for justice, some out of guilt, some because stories like these traveled fast in small towns. Claire sat in the front row with Mia beside her, Ranger lying at their feet. His body had healed more in the past few days than in the months he spent locked in shelters. But something deeper had healed too. The wound no vet could treat. The sense of being useless. The judge read the charges. Falsifying reports, dereliction of duty, obstruction of justice, animal endangerment, and willful abandonment of a K-9 in service. Dylan refused to look up. The chief addressed the council. Ranger was never unstable. He was betrayed. And we owe him more than we can repay. A ripple moved through the crowd. Then came the final announcement, a symbolic reinstatement for Ranger, so his record would end not in disgrace, but in honor. A retired K-9 medal, a plaque, a formal apology from the department. The chief stepped forward. We'd like to welcome him back to the force as an honorary member. And if possible, we'd like Ranger to return to service, even in limited capacity. The room murmured with approval. Claire felt Mia stiffen beside her. Ranger's head lifted, ears turning toward the man speaking, waiting for the next command he thought he owed the world. Claire stood slowly. "Sir, with respect, Ranger doesn't belong to the force anymore. He belongs with my daughter." The chief blinked, caught off guard. "But he's still capable. He could serve again." Claire's voice softened, but it did not waver. "He has served enough. And he's earned more than another badge. He's earned a home." Mia slipped her hand into Claire's. Ranger pressed his nose against her knee, sensing the weight in the air. Claire continued. "He spent years protecting people who failed him. It's our turn to protect him now. Ranger stays with Mia." A hush fell. Even the judge paused. Mia knelt and wrapped her arms around Ranger's neck. He leaned into her fully, placing his head on her leg as if sealing the truth himself. The chief exhaled slowly. Then he smiled. "You're right. He's done more for this county than half the officers in uniform. Let him rest." Someone in the crowd started clapping. Then another joined, and another. Soon the hall filled with applause rising like a wave, echoing off the walls, filling the air with something Ranger had not felt in years. Recognition, honor, freedom. Ranger didn't react the way most dogs would. He didn't bark. He didn't wag wildly. He simply closed his eyes, letting the sounds wash over him like a long-lost warmth returning to his bones. After the hearing, reporters swarmed outside, snapping pictures as Mia held Ranger's leash with both hands, proud as any child could be. Claire placed the honorary medal around Ranger's neck. It glinted in the sunlight, catching reflections of gold in his eyes. A reporter crouched near him. "Ranger, how does it feel to be a hero again?" Ranger looked past the cameras, past the crowd, focusing only on the little girl at his side. His tail thumped once. Soft, certain. Mia giggled and kissed the top of his head. "You're my hero, not theirs." Ranger rested his head against her leg again, closing his eyes in the peaceful surrender only a truly free soul could make. The wounds of his past hadn't vanished, but he was no longer a discarded soldier. He was Mia's dog, and in that simple truth, he had finally found the home he never thought he'd see again. 1 year can soften a place. Hollow Creek looked different in the spring light. The barns were no longer just weathered buildings. They were living spaces filled with movement, sound, and a kind of warmth the town had forgotten it could hold. Claire stepped out of the refurbished office of Hollow Creek Animal Rescue, a coffee mug in hand, the morning sun catching the strands of hair that had grown longer since she'd left the sheriff's department. She wore a simple flannel shirt, jeans, and boots scuffed from everyday work. Not a badge, not a duty belt, not the weight of a department that had once felt like home and had betrayed one of its own. She exhaled, a breath free of uniform expectations. It wasn't quiet because life had slowed. It was quiet because she finally felt steady. Behind her came the familiar rhythm she now recognized better than her own heartbeat. Ranger's pause against the porch planks. Slow, confident. A touch heavier than before, but still steady, still grounded. He stopped at her side, sitting just close enough that their shoulders brushed. The old shepherd's muzzle had grown whiter. His walk was stiffer in the mornings, but the tension that once clung to his frame like a permanent shadow was gone. What replaced it was gentleness, a settled strength, and an ease that only comes when a soul is finally safe. Mia burst out of the kennel barn, her braid bouncing behind her. She held 2 leashes tangled around her wrists, each attached to dogs who had once been too frightened to walk on grass. Today they followed her with a kind of trust only children seemed to inspire. "Mum, Ranger beat his own record," she called, grinning. "He walked all the way to the fence without slowing down." Claire smiled. That's because he knows someone's waiting for him on the other side. Mia knelt beside Ranger, hands cupping his cheeks. He leaned into her like he always did, eyes soft, tail brushing the ground in slow sweeps. The look between them still caught Claire off guard sometimes. It was something old and something new all at once, like two lives that had met in the exact moment they needed each other most. "Ready for rounds?" Claire asked. Mia nodded eagerly. Ranger pushed himself up, stretching until his joints cracked softly. A year ago, that sound would have made Claire wince with worry. Now it simply sounded like age and comfort settling into place. They walked the gravel path, looping around the rescue center. Birds chattered in the sycamores, and the early sun warmed the roofs of the kennels. Every dog they passed perked up. Ranger still carried an air about him, something that flowed deeper than dominance or aggression. Respect. Leadership. The other dogs recognized it instantly. A hound mix named Baylor whined eagerly when Ranger approached, tail wagging hard enough to shake his whole body. Ranger touched noses with him through the fence, a soft rumble in his chest. Friendly, reassuring. "He's like the mayor here," Mia said, amused. Claire laughed quietly. He always was. Halfway down the trail, they reached the pasture fence where the land opened wide towards the creek. Ranger trotted ahead, nose lifted to the wind. His ears twitched as if listening for something distant. Once, those instincts had been tied to danger, alarms, threats. Today, he simply listened. A pickup truck rolled up the dirt road. Ranger stopped, ears raised. Claire placed a hand on Mia's shoulder, a reflex she still hadn't unlearned. But the truck slowed peacefully, dust settling around it. Pastor Reed hopped out carrying 2 boxes of donated dog food. Claire exhaled. Some habits fade slow, she thought. Ranger approached Reed with calm steps, tail wagging once. Reed smiled and scratched the shepherd's chest. "Well, look at you," he said. "A year ago you'd have knocked me flat thinking I was trouble." Ranger blinked slowly, leaning into the touch. Reed chuckled. "Guess we all grow." Mia took that moment to hand him a drawing she'd made of Ranger leading a parade of rescued animals. Reed held it like a gift, more important than any donation. "You keep healing this town, Mia," he said softly. "You and your partner here." When the truck left, Claire and Mia continued their walk. Ranger stayed at Mia's side, occasionally brushing against her leg, matching her pace without needing a leash. Claire watched them for a moment, struck by a quiet realization. He isn't protecting her anymore, she thought. They're growing together. Back at the main yard, Mia released the dogs she'd been walking into the fenced field. Ranger lay down beneath the broad oak tree, the same spot he chose every morning. Mia dropped beside him, sprawling across his side like he was a warm blanket. He didn't budge, his eyes half closed, content, peaceful, the kind of rest no kennel or precinct had ever given him. Claire sat on the steps and watched her daughter run her hands through Ranger's fur, whispering things he seemed to understand without needing words. People sometimes asked what made the dog so loyal to a child he barely knew when they first met. Claire always answered the same way. He wasn't drawn to her innocence, he was drawn to her certainty. She believed he was worth saving long before he believed it himself. A breeze rolled through the yard, rustling the grass. Ranger lifted his head, sniffing the air again. His eyes remained calm. No fear. No ghosts from old wounds, just life. Just now. Mia wrapped her arms around him, pressing her cheek into his shoulder. "You're still my hero," she whispered. Ranger exhaled, slow and steady, resting his head on her lap as though laying down a burden he no longer needed to carry. The world around them settled into a gentle hush. No alarms, no shouting, no cages, just the quiet aftermath of a battle won. A year ago, Ranger had been a discarded soldier. Today he was home. Hollow Creek had always been a quiet town, the kind where generations lived and died without much changing. But over the past year, something had shifted. People spoke with a little more hope. The air around the old barns felt less like abandonment and more like renewal. And in the center of that change stood a German shepherd with a silvering muzzle and a little girl who believed in him long before anyone else did. The new wing of the rescue center was finished by early summer. Volunteers from every corner of town had shown up to paint walls, lay flooring, assemble kennels, and plant flowers along the walkway. Local carpenters donated lumber. Teen groups helped build exercise yards. The school art club painted a mural across the front wall, a silhouette of a shepherd's head against a rising sun. Above the entrance hung the sign everyone voted on: Ranger's Wing, a second chance for forgotten heroes. Claire stood with her arm around Mia as the ribbon-cutting ceremony began. Reporters gathered. Town officials lined up. Children from the elementary school held handmade posters. And Ranger? He sat tall at Mia's side, chest lifted, watching the crowd with calm interest. Not fear, not tension, just quiet awareness. The kind found only in those who had faced enough storms to recognize peace when it came. Mayor Sullivan stepped forward. "This wing represents what Hollow Creek wants to be," he said. "A place where no one, human or animal, gets discarded when they're no longer useful. And we owe this vision to a little girl with $1 and a whole lot of courage." The crowd applauded. Mia's cheeks flushed red. Ranger leaned into her leg, sensing her embarrassment and grounding her the way he always did. After the ceremony, children poured into the play yard to greet the newly arrived retired canines. Dogs with graying coats, missing teeth or slow steps. Each one had a story. Each one carried scars. But in Ranger's Wing, scars were badges, not burdens. Mia crouched beside a Belgian Malinois who had lost part of his tail during a mission. "You're safe here," she whispered, her hand brushing his back. Ranger watched nearby, tail sweeping the grass, as if giving his approval. Later that week, Mia was invited to speak at Hollow Creek Elementary for Career Day. She stood on the small gym stage wearing her Junior Dog Advocate badge pinned crookedly on her shirt. Ranger lay at her feet, his presence filling the whole space without making a sound. The kids stared at him with awe. One whispered, "That's the dog from the news." Another said, "He's huge." Mia cleared her throat. "This is Ranger. He used to be a police dog, but something bad happened and people thought he wasn't good anymore." Ranger lifted his head. "But they were wrong." Mia continued, "Sometimes heroes get hurt. Sometimes they need someone to fight for them. And I think we should always look twice before deciding something or someone is broken." The room fell quiet. A teacher wiped her eyes. And Ranger, sensing the tenderness in the moment, put his paw over Mia's shoe. The children erupted into soft gasps. One girl raised her hand, trembling with excitement. "Can we pet him?" Mia smiled. "One at a time. He likes gentle." It became the school's most attended Career Day segment in years. A week later, an unexpected visitor walked into the rescue center, a young officer in uniform. He hesitated at the gate, hands tucked awkwardly in his pockets. Claire recognized him instantly. Deputy Kyle Horton, one of the men who had laughed at Ranger on the day of the auction. The one who joked he wasn't worth the $1. Kyle walked toward Ranger slowly, guilt written all over his face. Ranger rose but didn't bristle. His tail remained still, his posture tall and neutral. Guarded but not hostile. "Deputy Horton," Claire said carefully. "What brings you here?" Kyle removed his hat, rubbing the back of his neck. I owe that dog an apology." Mia, who had been brushing Ranger's fur, froze. Her eyes narrowed in an expression far too serious. for a child her age. Kyle swallowed hard. I was wrong about him. I judged what I saw instead of who he was. And after everything came out, I realized I was part of the problem. So I'm here to fix that. Or try. He knelt in front of Ranger, not reaching out, just meeting the shepherd's eyes. I'm sorry, buddy. You deserved better. You still do. Ranger studied him for a long moment. His ears twitched, his head lowered slightly. And then, in a gesture that caught everyone off guard, he stepped forward and touched his nose lightly to Kyle's hand. A quiet acceptance. Kyle exhaled shakily. Thank you, he whispered. Claire crossed her arms, the corner of her mouth lifting. What now? You want to volunteer? Actually, Kyle said, standing straighter. I want to do more than that. I want to help train the retired K9s. I figure they spent their lives serving us. Least we can do is help them spend their retirement with dignity. Mia's expression softened. She glanced at Ranger. What do you think? She asked him. Ranger looked between the two humans. Then he gave a small, approving wag. Claire smiled. Looks like you're hired. That afternoon, Kyle joined them in the main yard. He learned how to coax nervous dogs out of their shells, how to help older shepherds navigate obstacle courses adapted for age and injury, how to listen to animals who no longer trusted uniforms. But Ranger stayed close to him the entire time, not as a watchdog, but as a quiet supervisor, making sure this new chapter was being built right. As the sun dipped below the treetops, casting long shadows across the rescue center, Ranger lay beneath the oak tree with Mia, his head resting on her legs. Nearby, other dogs dozed in the evening breeze, their breathing steady, their bodies finally at peace. Claire stood with Kyle near the fence, watching the scene unfold. Hard to believe he came from a $1 auction, Claire murmured. Kyle nodded. Seems to me that dollar bought this whole town a second chance. Ranger shifted, eyes drifting across the rolling fields, the kennels, the volunteers, the children. A home built on grace, a legacy born from being thrown away. His breathing deepened, slow and warm, as Mia traced circles behind his ear. You started all of this, she whispered. And though he didn't understand the words, Ranger understood the meaning. His past no longer defined him. His legacy did. The late afternoon sun slanted across the newly built patio of Hollow Creek Animal Rescue, turning the yard golden. Dogs padded lazily in the background, some resting under the trees, others rolling in the grass. The hum of quiet joy filled the place, the kind of peace that didn't ask for attention, but settled into every wooden beam and every blade of grass. A local news van parked near the entrance. 2 crew members adjusted lights while the reporter, Melissa Hart, fixed her microphone and smoothed her jacket. She glanced toward the oak tree where Ranger rested beside Mia, his head on her lap, breathing slow and steady like the world finally made sense. Claire walked out of the office, brushing dust off her jeans. She greeted the crew with a polite handshake, but her eyes kept drifting toward Ranger, just to be sure he was comfortable. Ready when you are, Melissa said. They chose a spot near the fence line. From here, Ranger's wings stretched behind them like a quiet promise, sunlight glinting off the sign that carried his name. The camera clicked on, the small red light glowing. Melissa smiled into the frame. We're here today at Hollow Creek Animal Rescue, where a remarkable story has transformed not just a dog's life, but an entire town. I'm joined by Claire Whitaker, the manager of the center and the woman at the heart of this journey. Claire offered a small nod, folding her hands to stop them from trembling. She was brave in crisis, firm in danger, but cameras still made her uneasy. Melissa continued. The question everyone keeps asking is simple. How did you know Ranger wasn't dangerous when your daughter stepped toward him that day? The boom mic lowered. The yard fell into an expectant hush. Even the dogs nearby seemed to pause. Claire didn't answer immediately. Her eyes drifted to Ranger. He had lifted his head, watching her with those amber eyes that carried a world of storms he had walked through and survived. He blinked once, slow, calm, as if telling her, "It's okay." She walked over, resting her hand gently on his head. His ears twitched, leaning into her touch. "I didn't," Claire said softly. The camera zoomed closer, framing the shepherd's face. Whiskers silvered, scars softened, eyes deep with an old soul's patience. Claire continued, "But she did." The camera shifted toward Mia, who looked up with the same quiet bravery she had shown in that dusty auction barn. Her fingers curled in Ranger's fur, grounding both of them. "She saw something none of us did," Claire said. "Not the scars, not the fear. She saw who he really was. And she never once doubted him." Melissa's eyes softened. "And now? After everything he's done, the rescue, the investigation, the legacy he's built here?" Claire crouched beside Ranger, sliding her hand along his neck. His breathing deepened, steady as ever. "Now," she said, "he guards hope instead of danger. He watches over every dog that comes through our gates, and he reminds us that heroes don't retire. They heal, and then they help others heal." The camera zoomed in again, closer this time. Ranger's eyes held the lens with a stillness that felt almost human. Calm, wise, present, as if he were still guarding that little girl in the purple jacket, still listening for the faintest cry, still willing to stand in the fire for the people he loved. Melissa lowered her microphone. "Claire," she said softly, "if you could say one thing to the world watching this, what would it be?" Claire looked straight into the camera. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" The question hung in the air, simple and true. In the background, Ranger lifted his head and rested it gently on Mia's knee. A small motion that said everything words couldn't. Loyalty, memory, forgiveness, purpose. The cameraman slowly pulled back, capturing the yard, the murals, the rescue dogs trotting freely beneath the trees. Children brushed retired canines. Volunteers carried blankets and bowls. Life moved with a quiet rhythm that belonged entirely to the place Ranger had rebuilt, with nothing but courage and a second chance. Melissa signaled cut. The red light clicked off. But Ranger stayed locked on the camera, as if he knew the story wasn't just his. It belonged to every forgotten dog waiting for someone to see their worth. Later, as the news van drove off, and the evening light softened across the field, Claire walked inside to finish paperwork. Mia stayed on the grass, leaning against Ranger's warm side. "You did amazing," she whispered. Ranger let out a deep breath, closing his eyes, letting the world settle gently around him. Mia rested her cheek against his shoulder. "They'll hear our story," she said, "and maybe they'll help other dogs too." Ranger didn't move. He didn't need to. The quiet was enough. The legacy was already in motion. And as the last rays of light faded beyond Hollow Creek, the narrator's voice would echo across countless screens. If this story touched your heart, share it. Support your local rescues. And if you believe every forgotten hero deserves a second chance, hit like, subscribe, and join us for more tales of courage from German Shepherd stories. Fade out.